Okay, we're going to get started here. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third and final part of our nutrition series, making the most of low quality forage, tips for improving animal performance on low quality forage. I am Sydney Fortier. I'm a research and innovation coordinator with the BCRC, and I will be your moderator this evening. This session this evening will be approximately 1 hour, but may go longer depending on the number of questions we have during the live Q&A following the end of our presentations. Just as a reminder, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you want to chat with us, please use the chat function in Zoom and start a conversation. So we ask that you please submit any questions that you have that come up during the course of this webinar through the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. It just looks like that on the bottom of the corner. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who has registered for the webinar, not just those who are able to attend this evening. So if you know of anyone who is really excited but isn't able to join, they will be receiving that link as long as they've registered. This webinar is also available for CE credits for vets and veterinary technicians. You can also receive CE credits for some of our previous webinars, and if you're interested in that, watch the recording of these select webinars. You can see the list of them on our website, beefresearch.ca, and then you'll just need to take a quiz, receive 70% or higher, and you'll receive your certificate. If you are a vet or RVT joining us this evening and have identified yourself as that on Zoom, you will automatically receive your CE credit in the next couple of days following the webinar. If you have any questions or haven't received a certificate, even though you've attended a webinar or answered a quiz, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Dana Parker, and we'll definitely be able to help you out. So before we begin, I would just wanted to highlight a couple of BCRC's interactive tools and calculators that we have on our website. So these tools allow you to use your own operation numbers to guide informed decision-making and potentially identify ways to improve productivity and profitability. And specifically, if you're interested in better utilizing low-quality forage, or interested or have the opportunity to try out an alternative feed, but would like to crunch some of the numbers first, these tools here are a really good place to start. So there's the tool for evaluating feed results, value of crops for livestock feeds calculator, as well as the economic value of feeds based on nutrient content calculator. If you haven't subscribed already, we highly encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list, where you can keep up to date of what the BCRC is up to, as well as seasonally relevant information. So if you go on our website and click on latest posts, and you can find the subscribe button there. And while you're there, you can also check out our tools and resources for vets and vet teams, as well as sign up for our Vet Tools newsletter, which goes out seasonally. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce our first speaker this evening, Dr. Gabriel Ribeiro, and we will be hearing from Kim Jo a little bit later on this evening. So as I introduce him, I'm going to ask him to share his screen. So just a little introduction. Dr. Gabriel Ribeiro obtained his DVM and Master of Science and PhD in Animal Science from the UFMG in Brazil. After the completion of his PhD, he worked as a postdoc at the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Lethbridge Research and Development Centre. He is currently an assistant professor and the Saskatchewan Beef Industry Chair at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Ribeiro's research interest is in beef cattle production and nutrition, and his research focuses on uncovering nutritional strategies to improve health, performance, and profitability, while simultaneously lessening the environmental impact of beef cattle production. Overall, his research goals to identify technologies and nutritional and management practices to improve the sustainability and productivity of forage-based and feedlot beef cattle production systems. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Gabriel.
Thanks, Sydney. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I also want to thank the BCRC for inviting me. And hope you enjoy what I have to say here. So, just to get into it here, then I guess I was invited to talk about low quality forages, right? But I guess not really a good position to be in. I think as most producers and people involved with livestock and beef production, it's an area that we really don't want to be working in, but sometimes it happens, right? We all know that the best we can to improve the quality of our forages. That means that less supplementation and less costs will be involved, and then with that we can increase profitability. But many things can happen, right? And get a little bit out of our control. For example, we have seen this stories like this on the news very often, right? Where droughts and situations that really cause feed shortage that makes us have to deal with feeding low quality forage. You can see in this picture that not even this cow is happy about eating low quality forages, right? And that's not an easy situation for the producer to be into when situations like that happen. So we need to understand and find ways to deal with other alternatives. So I think the first thing I want to get into here is a definition of what we call what's this low quality forages, and what does that mean. So it can be defined in various ways, right? Like there's not one definition, but usually when we talk about forage quality, we are talking about the potential of that forage to promote gain or milk production. Uh, so and associated to that, we also talk about the palatability of that forage, intake, digestibility, the nutrient content of that forage, and if that forage has any anti-nutritional or anti-nutritional or anti-quality factors. But here, really, intake and digestibility are really two very important factors, because palatability will affect intake and so on. And also some of those anti-quality factors can also affect intake. So intake and digestibility will really drive that production or that gain or that milk production in that animal. And then when we're talking about forage quality, most of the times we don't have that data about intake and digestibility of the forage we're talking about. So usually we use forage analysis, and we look at the nutrient content from those analyses in that forage to have an estimate of the quality of that forage, right? So we look at that, and then we see if that forage has an adequate quality to meet the requirements for the animals we're talking about, or if that quality is not enough, and then we will have to supplement that forage with something else, some other feed. So some examples of low quality forages that we use often would be any kind of late maturity hay, right? Stockpiled forages, for example, crop residue, cereal straw, corn stover, canola straw, and many others that we have available. Uh, Drought stressed crops also would fit into that category. And we have many silage too. Sometimes we think about silage and we think all silages are good quality, and it's not really the case, right? We have a lot of bad quality silage around, and sometimes those will also fit in this category there. So what are the common characteristics of those low quality forages? Usually when we're talking about low quality forages, sometimes these are just like general characteristics, right? Sometimes the forage may not have all those, but they will have most of these traits here that I'm discussing. So usually they're low in crude protein, usually lower than 7% crude protein. And they're high in fiber, high in NDF, high in ADF, and high in lignin there. So usually it will change a little bit the level of NDF we are looking to really classify as a lower quality forage if it's legume or grass. Usually for legume above 50% NDF, we are already classifying it as a low quality forage. And if we are talking about a grass, about 60% or so. Oh, so this this forage usually have low digestibility, and what it means is like digestibility usually below 50%, which will promote lower energy available to the animal, right? And that forage associated with that, we also promote low dry matter intake. So if you think that intake and digestibility is reducing when we're feeding low quality forage, so the amount of nutrients coming to that animal from that forage compared to a higher quality forage is much, much lower, right? So we have to be careful there. So another important thing that we need to consider is the impact of that forage quality on cattle performance, and that's why it's so important, right? And then understanding how we make best use of that forage will make a big difference. When we look at forage quality here as protein, as a measurement of forage protein content of that forage as a measurement of quality, you can see as protein content reduces here, that intake of that forage reduces, and also the gain that we have from those animals reduces here. So that's why we really want to try to have higher quality forages, because they promote higher intake and better performance, right? Even though not always possible. Another important thing to talk about when you're talking about low quality forages, and even more important in the cold months like now and the winter, getting into the winter now, is the problems with abomasal impactation, right? So we have, as we feed those low quality forages that are very indigestible, low in energy, they can, if we're not supplementing them and feeding them appropriately, they can promote that impactation. And that's even most common in winter, because or in cold months, because cattle starts to try to eat more feed or that forage to be able to produce more heat and keep their temperature. And because of that, it's such a low digestible forage, it will impact and will then can even cause death to that animal, right? So it can cause real wreck in many farms. And it's something that we really gotta be careful when we're feeding those low quality forages. But if we take some precautions and understand the limitations of some of those forages, we can really prevent this from happening, and that is not really a big problem. One of the things that's really important is when we're feeding those low quality forages, to have water available. So water availability is really essential. If not available or not easily available, you can increase the likelihood of having those abomasal impaction. And it would really be an animal welfare concern if not available, right? So really make sure that that's available is going to be important, not just for the animal itself, but also to digest that fiber, those ruminant microbes. We also need like water to make that process. When we look into forage quality, then, and here I have some examples that are composition I have from the beef nutrient requirement model here, the NASEM 2016. And there they have the feed composition tables with data from many different feedstuffs. So I took here an example of usually good quality forage like barley silage, and then low quality sources like barley straw, wheat straw, and I have a composition of a wheat grass that they have over there too in the book. And if you look at those tables, there's a huge variation in the composition of barley silage. So NDF for barley silage, which you're considering here good quality silage, is about 55%, but it varies. The standard deviation, there's 7, so plus or minus 7. So it can be a really good quality forage, but it can also be a poor quality forage. And there's a lot of bad quality barley silage around. So we really can't trust those numbers that we have on the average from that table, from those the book values, to calculate or to formulate our diets, right? We really need to make sure we're sending in samples for analysis and getting that data. So with that composition from our actual forages on farm, then we can formulate better formulate our diets and prevent issues and make sure our animals will meet our expectations. So the same thing happened for barley straw, wheat straw, and for the different grasses. Just an example with wheatgrass here, you can see you can have a high quality wheatgrass from 14% crude protein going down to 3% and 3% with fiber going anywhere from 56% up to 70%, and that will influence the energy that's available for that animal, right? So really make sure you're sending your feeds for analysis, so you can get a better estimate of the nutritional quality and the energy that feed has. So we really need to match the feed provided to the animal nutrient requirements, right? So the nutrient requirements from those animals, from that class of animal that we are working, we can find them in the book, right? The nutrient requirement of beef cattle here, that's what we usually use here in North America. And we need to see what we have on farm to meet those requirements for that class of cattle. Most likely when we were talking about, or we were using low quality forages, we will have to be supplementing that with some type of concentrate or some type of feed, protein or an energy supplement to meet those requirements. But when we talk about meeting those requirements, it's not just the concentration of the nutrients in that feed, right? It's also about how much of that feed those animals can eat, right? Because it's the actual amount per day in kilos per day, grams per day, or IUs per day of that will satisfy the requirement of those animals, and then that will promote performance, or will promote be available for maintenance and for growth, or for lactation or whatever, or for gestation of that cow. So if we look here as the requirement of like a cow, a beef cow, we can see here the requirements looking from just after calving, in months after calving. And we can see that this cow has the beef cow in general has a really high requirement in those months after parturition because of milk production. Then as we get close to weaning that calf, it reduces quite a bit as milk production reduces. And then the lowest of the requirements are in that period when that cow is usually dry and that calf is weaned. And then it starts to increase again and gets pretty high again 2 to 3 months before parturition again, when that cow needs more nutrients to put for the growth of that calf that is in uterus, that fetus that's in uterus, right? So we really need to understand that, because that will definitely affect how we feed those animals and how we manage the feed in our farms. And when we're talking, I was talking about intake earlier, and really when we're talking about low quality forage, we really need to think about intake, because like I said, the intake is so important to meet those nutrient requirements of the animal. And when we're using low quality forage, intake is really reduced. The amount that an animal can eat of a low quality forage as a percent of its body weight is much lower for a poor forage quality, as you can see, compared to a high quality forage. And I have some examples for you here from master's students of mine that is current in our program here, that we looked at early and late cut alfalfa hay, early and late cut Timothy hay. And you can see here that dry matter intake reduced drastically from 2.7% of body weight to 2.2% of body weight as that forage quality reduced. And the same thing happening here for the Timothy hay. And we can see the same thing happening for digestibility. Digestibility reduces as that plant matures. So really important. And it's even worse when we're feeding cereal straws or any of the like barley straw or wheat straw. They're very lignified, really low quality feedstuffs, but we still can feed them if we understand their limitations. For here, we have an example of like study we did where we fed some beef heifers 70% of their diet on a dry matter base as barley straw and 30% as a concentrate that we formulated to meet protein, mineral, and vitamin requirements. So everything but energy was being met. And we went to see what was the intake and digestibility of those animals. And we saw that in that type of diet, animals, you can see the intake is much lower than we see on a higher quality forage, right? 1.45% of body weight only as an intake of that forage, of that diet. An intake, and also the digestibility was about 52.8%. However, we need to pay attention here that this diet was 70% barley straw. So really, really high inclusion of barley straw in the diet, which we usually don't see, and we usually don't recommend feeding that much barley straw. However, we show here that you can feed the diet really, really high in barley straw if you know what you're doing. In this case here, we are meeting everything else that that animal needed in terms of protein, minerals, and vitamins. We also provided that barley straw as a long forage to prevent any issues with like impactation, really letting that animal chew that forage and eat. And that those heifers were still gaining about 0.33 kilos per day, or like 0.75 pounds per day or so. So it's pretty good gains for an animal that we're feeding such a low quality diet. But when we're thinking about those low quality forages, we need to understand how that digestion is happening, so we can think about maximizing that digestion of that feed stuff. In really a low quality forage, it's really high in fiber, right? So we're talking about mostly fiber digestion. And where that's happening in the rumen of that cow. And what's making the digestion in the rumen of that cow is not the enzymes from that animal or that animal itself, but the microbial population in that rumen, the protozoa, the bacteria, the fungi. They all work together, those microbes, to break down that fiber. And to break down that fiber, those microbes really need to attach to that fiber. And after attaching this to that fiber, those microbes will start to produce enzymes to break down that fiber, which is a slow process. And that's why it's a problem, right? Because high producing animal, the feed does not have a lot of time in this rumen. So if you're feeding something that needs longer time to be digested, it becomes an issue. So in that rumen, what happens then, that rumen microbiome, those microbes will work together to degrade those fiber substrate, that fiber, and produce volatile fatty acids and microbial protein. And those volatile fatty acids would be then the source of energy to that animal, and that microbial protein will then be the source of protein to that animal, which is really, really important. However, when we're talking about those low quality forages, normally 50% or less is digested. So we have a lot of it that's not being digested, and it's going to be lost in the feces. So how can we maximize or try to improve some of that that we are losing as feces from those feedstuffs? So I think one of the things that's really important to make us stop here to think about is that when we're thinking about digesting, maximizing that fiber digestion, we should not be just thinking on the animal requirements itself, but also on the ruminal microbes requirements. So those microbes that are breaking down the fiber, they have a requirement too. And they are the ones that are really doing the hard work for us here. So we need to understand that their requirements need to be met. And like I said before, water is going to be really important for the process. So that animal needs to have water available, so they have enough water in that rumen to supply that medium for that fermentation to happen. It needs some nitrogen too in the form of ammonia, but not just ammonia. Some people think that just a urea or urea tub like with molasses supplement is enough. It's not. They don't do much for low quality forages, because those ruminal microbes need more than just like a non-protein nitrogen. They also need like real protein, feed protein in the form of amino acid and peptides. So those microbes can then grow and be able to digest and degrade that fiber. They also need some minerals like calcium, phosphorus, sulfur, magnesium, cobalt to be really, really important for that microbial community. And they also need to maximize fiber digestion, branch chain branched chain volatile fatty acids. And these come from feed protein. So we have branched chain amino acids in feed protein. Those can be fermented into this branched chain VFAs that will then be used by the microbes, and they can really help maximize fiber digestion. And if we have low feed protein, low amino acids, and low branched chain VFAs, then our fiber digestion will definitely be impacted. And there's a lot of work there that shows us that. So moving on, once the situation has happened and we have to deal with low quality forage, really, what can we do? So there's some ways we can try to improve, and when we rank them, the first thing is we need to look at the animal category that we have in our farm and divide them and group them in the ones that have a higher requirement, lower requirement, younger animals, older animals, because they will need, or they will have a different capacity to deal with low quality forages, right? So a younger animal cannot digest fiber as well as an older, more mature animal. And for example, a dry cow has a much lower requirement than a lactating cow or a cow in the last third of gestation. So we can direct those lower quality forages if we have different qualities, forage qualities in the farm, different resources. So we direct lower quality forage to the animals that can deal better or that have lower requirements than other, and keep the higher quality forages to those that need better quality feed stuff. And that way we can save money and we can make better use of the feeds we have. The second thing we need to think about is diet formulation. We really need to look and have that feed analyzed, and based on the results we get from this analysis, we can then plan a supplementation to what's missing in that diet or in that forage, so we can supplement the requirements of that animal. With all that met, the other thing we can think about is post-harvest treatments. What type of treatment can we do to that forage to increase the digestion and increase what we can get in terms of energy from that fiber, from that forage? So I'm going to quickly get into and show a little bit of some physical and chemical treatments that we can do. I'm not going to really talk much about enzymatic. And then the last way would be some feed additives that can increase fiber digestion. I think there's a lot of products out there, like commercial products out there, probiotics, prebiotics, enzymes, and all. However, compared to everything else that I'm talking, those are minimum, and those will be, the impact will be much, much lower, and we don't have time to get into that today. And results are not super consistent with some of those products, so I won't really get into that. But definitely we need to look at the animal category we're feeding, formulating proper diet, and meeting those requirements, and then getting into if we're going to do some type of treatment of that forage or not. When we're looking at that, like I said, the category of the animals here, for example, just an example here from that we have different quality of forages, like changing in digestibility, and for what category that forage would be more suitable. So you can see here for a dry pregnant cow, we can use a low quality forage, but then as we move that to a cow calf with that's lactating and all, that will need a little bit higher quality forage. And if we're moving up to a steer that's gaining and putting at 1.5 pounds per day of body weight in terms of gain, we need even better quality of forage, right? So really understanding what type of animal we're talking, like I was discussing earlier, the requirement of that cow will be important, so we can direct and we can choose better which forage to use in each type of situation. In terms of supplementation, really, I talked how low the protein content in those low quality forages is, right? So we really will be really essential to supplement protein in that diet to maximize digestion of that fiber and to meet the requirements of those animals, the rumen, microbes, and also the cattle, the animal itself. Definitely we can use some non-protein nitrogen there, but we will also need to use something, some true protein there. And that's, I'm talking about canola meal, soybean meal, or dried distillers grains, prosoluble, all will be, can be used and are good sources, right? Canola meal, for example, highly available here in Western Canada. definitely can be the main source of the diet protein. Distillers grains also super available here in North America, in some areas more than others, but really good source of protein, but also a good source of energy in a form of digestible fiber in that the DGS. So you're supplying protein, but at the same time helping with some energy there, which is quite interesting. And energy, when we get into energy, energy will likely be needed to be supplemented. Some of those protein supplementation, you're getting some of that energy through that supplement already, but some will likely be needed too. In addition to that, some to meet the requirements of that animal, but a little bit of that energy we also, in a form of starch or sugar, can also help the ruminal microbes digest fiber. But here I'm talking small quantities, right? However, many times people feed large quantities of cereal grains, right? Like 3, 4, 5 kilos of cereal grain. And that can be a problem because sometimes a lot of that grain, the animal that's being fed that low quality forage is going to come and eat that grain really quickly. And that can cause a reduction in ruminal pH because it ferments really quickly, and then that can really reduce fiber digestion. So really trying to use like the DGS as a form of like dry distillers grains as a form of energy that is not in the form of starch, in form of like a really digestible fiber, is a way to help prevent some of those issues when you have to supplement more energy. So you don't feed too much of that cereal grain. Or if you have to supplement a lot of those cereal grains, and it's a lot at once, maybe divide that in different portions will be something to consider. When we're looking at supplementing feeds, energy feeds, some of them can be high in fat. If you're talking about oil seeds or oil seed cakes or some of these screenings, and these can be a great source of supplement to provide energy and provide protein to that animal. But too much fat can also reduce fiber digestion. So we need to be careful with that. Usually you want to try to be below 6% of fat in the total diet matter, because above 6% of fat in the diet matter, in the total diet matter, we will see reduction in that fiber digestion. In terms of, I'm not going to get into much here, but mineral and vitamin supplementation is essential. Like I said, not just for the animal, but also for the ruminal microbes to be able to degrade that fiber. So there are many commercial supplements available out there. And it's really, really important that you are providing the supplement to meet the requirements of those animals. So really, that we really have that to have that available to the animals. If you're doing it as a free choice, you need to be controlling intake and having an estimate of how much those animals are eating. If they're eating what you expect them to eat, because if not, then you can change that mineral, change that formulation to improve intake. The best way definitely is to force feed those minerals and vitamins into a supplement or something, a concentrate or supplement that the animals like to eat, and then for sure those animals are getting that. But if not possible, that the free choice can be a good option too. If you control intake and you know that animals are eating enough of that mineral to meet those requirements. Another important thing that we often see when we're feeding low quality forages like straw and others is that those animals really crave salt. And sometimes people really try to minimize cost and try to not have them available. But in those situations, it's even more important to have that free choice available, that salt, because they're craving that salt. And by eating that salt, that increase ruminant dilution rates. And by increasing that ruminal dilution rate, we can also help prevent abomasal impactation, right? So by eating more salt, the animals start to drink more water, and by drinking more water and that salt in the rumen, it really starts to make that passage rate of the fluids through the rumen quicker, and that can also increase the fermentation rate of the microbes, like the turnover rate of the microbes increase, and then we can have more microbial protein synthesis. So many things that can happen with that can be positive to the animals. So I would really not try to save money here and make sure there's a lot of water and that salt is available too. When we get into physical treatment, the main ones would be chopping, grinding and pelleting. Chopping, we really don't see consistent improvements in animal performance by chopping, but really the advantage we have will be by reducing wastage, right? If you're chopping and providing it somehow in a trough, that you can reduce wastage by doing that. If you're mixing it in a total mixed diet, then you can reduce sorting by chopping it, which is an important thing. So that would be the main advantage. In terms of digestion of that forage, you won't change that low quality forage, you won't change much. Grinding can help in terms of increasing feed intake and mostly for young animals. But really grinding and pelleting is the one that can really improve feed intake and improve digestion and improve the average daily gains and feed efficiency. Usually digestion is reduced, or the digestibility or digestion is reduced because that feed passes through the rumen much faster. So that's why they can also eat more. But because they can eat so much more, that's why performance of average daily gains are usually much more, so increased in that way. However, when we are doing grinding and pelleting, we are really destroying the structure of that fiber. And because of that, the effectivity of that fiber, the physical effectivity of that fiber is gone. So that forage becomes much more, looking much more like a concentrate than a forage. So the ability of that forage to maintain ruminal pH and prevent acidosis is just disappears when you do that. So in a sense, we start to change how we compare that forage with another forage, with the cost of another forage, to comparing that with the cost of feeding more concentrate or feeding a type of supplement, right? Because of that. And grinding and pelleting, there's costs involved in that. Like, this is some old costs I found, but maybe nowadays is even higher than that. I'm not quite sure, but definitely something to consider. But they can be not too bad if you think about the feed prices that we have nowadays that are going higher and higher. Maybe things to consider when we don't have forages or feedstuffs available. Other source of treatment would be chemical treatment. There are many forms of chemical treatment. The alkali treatments are definitely the most common, the one with most research that have better results. And into them, we have many options. And however, the ones we see most of the results here would be, or most of the studies would be with sodium hydroxide and calcium hydroxide, calcium oxide, and some work with ammoniation. How do they work? The idea is that they can partially solubilize some of that fiber, the hemicellulose, lignin, and silica. And by that, they also disrupt the fiber structure, and then will improve the digestibility of that fiber. In addition to that, they promote a faster rate of hydration when that forage reaches the rumen. And that hydration is really important of that forage to promote the attachment of the microbes that's going to degrade that fiber in the rumen. So that's another advantage of those processes. Definitely, sodium hydroxide is the alkali treatment that we have best results on when we look at the data in the literature. It can promote very good gains in terms of dry matter intake and increase in digestibility. 22% increase in intake and 30% increase in dry matter digestibility. However, we don't see it much being used lately. Really, due to safety concerns about the use of sodium hydroxide, so something to think about. The other option that really have good results that we see a lot of work is with ammoniation. It can increase dry matter intake up to 20% or so, and digestibility by 15%, so it's quite interesting. However, we have the cost. We think about the cost of adding that ammonia. In addition to that, really, there's large concerns in terms of the safety of handling that ammonia. That is really a big limitation to the larger use of this chemical treatment. And lately, we have been doing and seeing a lot more work with calcium oxide, because of the safety of using that product compared to the other ones I just talked about. So the recommendation of most of the work is to treat those straws or byproducts there with about 5% calcium oxide and hydrate that straw with at least 50% moisture to improve the results and to promote that reaction. However, if you look at the literature, there's really mixed results. A lot of work that shows no results and some work that shows positive results. And we really don't understand why some work shows results and other don't, why there's no consistency there. But anyways, lately we've done some work. We saw some interesting results with calcium oxide when we treated wheat straw with calcium oxide, and then we replaced completely the barley silage in high grain diets of finishing beef cattle, and we didn't without seeing any decrease in performance, which was quite interesting. And we are really interested in doing more work in that area, and I know there's a lot of people in Lethbridge doing work in that area. So it would be really nice to see more work coming out with this calcium oxide. But definitely there's something there. I'm not sure the calcium oxide treatment of straw for at higher levels of inclusion in the diet, what would be the impact there? Would be something to test if you're thinking about feeding like a cow or a dry cow or a pregnant cow. But definitely it's much easier to work with and much safer to work with. And then just to finalize here, I think as an alternative, as we think about supplementing low quality forage, we always need to think about alternative feeds, right? By looking at these byproducts feeds, we usually have opportunity to reduce feed costs. So we have to look around our farm where we are and what's available, what type of processing plants cleaning or processing plants we have to see what byproducts are available, because usually we can get those at a more economical price there, and that can really make a difference to the bottom line of your farm. So really try to use as much as you can of those byproducts. However, be careful because there's many byproducts out there and they are quite different from each other. And even the same byproduct, they can vary quite a bit in the composition of that. So make sure you take samples, you analyze those samples, you know what you're doing, so you can use that appropriate and balance those diets appropriately, right? So really need to understand the pros and cons of each of those byproducts. We don't have time to get into all of them, but definitely it's something we always need to think, and even more when you're talking about low quality forage that needs supplementation. So those byproducts can really make a big difference. So just as a summary here, we really need to think then from all we talk about, balancing the availability of the feed resources with our cattle groups, right? Making sure the animals that need more gets the better quality forage, and the animals that are more adapted or need a bit less can use that lower quality forage. It would be important. Analyze those feed resources, balance that diet adequately, supplementing protein and energy as necessary. Really maximize those use of local feedstuffs and byproducts can be quite important to reduce feed costs. Definitely make sure you're providing mineral and vitamin supplements appropriately to meet those requirements of the rumen and also from that animal. And consider those forage process techniques if you wanted to get a little bit more, an extract from that forage, more than we can get by supplementing that animal itself. So just to finalize, those low quality forages can be a valuable resource if we know those limitations, and we can correct those limitations, right? With that, I want to thank you, and I'll pass it to you, Sydney.
Thank you so much, Gabe. That was a great presentation. So I am going to introduce our next speaker, Kim-Jo Bliss. So Dr. Ribeiro, if you want to quit sharing your screen, and I'll invite Kim to do so. And while that is happening, I will introduce Kim-Jo. So Kim Jo was born and raised in northwestern Ontario, near the town of Emo, Ontario. Kim Jo developed a love of the farm at a young age as her grandma was farming after being widowed. After graduating high school, she attended the New Liskeard College of Ag Technology. Kim Jo started working as a summer student at what was known as the Crop Check North and Crop Research Station in the Rainy River District. Kim Jo is still working at the same research station, though it has moved and has gone through 2 other name changes and is now known as the Ontario Crops Research Centre. Emo, a University of Guelph station. Kim Jo also farms north of Emo with a 50 cow-calf herd and a small flock of sheep. Kim Jo is deeply involved with all things local, in particular the Stratton Sales Barn and Rainy River Regional Abattoir. Currently a director of the Beef Farmers of Ontario Board, Kim Jo loves to promote ag in the North. So please join me in welcoming Kim Jo.
Hello, thanks, Sydney. I think I got everything set up here. So you definitely heard a lot more technical presentation, and now you're going to move into some just really what happened in Rainy River, and I'm going to try to build it up to tell you why we ended up feeding some lower quality feed stuff. So Sydney just introduced me, so I don't need to really go back with this information. I have a beef farm and a small flock of sheep, and I work at the research station, and there's no animals at our research station, it's all crops. So some of the pictures I'm using tonight will be from the research station as well. So just so you know what it's normally like in Rainy River, we normally have a fairly wet season, either at the beginning or the end of the year. And I don't know if we know really what normal is anymore, but we normally have around 500 millimeters of rain from May 1st to the end of October, which is around 20 inches. And in Rainy River, our corn heat unit average number is usually between 2340 and 2450 heat units. And normal frost-free days, I guess normal would be around May 10th to September 15th. So just to show you what happened in 2021, I have the normal rainfall temperature or rainfall amounts for May, June, and July. And you'll see what we had here in 2021. We had 34 millimeters in May, 43 in June, 26 in July. And then this is what we jumped to this year. So we are not experiencing any drought conditions in Rainy River this year. So we're not experiencing quite the same amount of feed issues. So in 2021, I think what sort of started our perfect storm was we did have some frost, like I said, continually from May 5th to the May 12th. And then what really set us back was on May 27th and May 28th, we had hard frosts that actually showed damages to our forages. This is some alfalfa. I know the pictures aren't great, but our alfalfa and red clover, all of our forages and our hay and our pastures that we should have been putting cows on were set back real hard and real quickly. I know this temperature chart is showing you some August temperatures, but this is what happened. We went from frost to no rain to extreme heat for the summer, and it just set us up for a pretty big disaster. Most people held cattle back. I'd say most times in Rainy River, cattle are sent to pasture anytime after that May long weekend to the beginning of June. But this picture showing you on June the 4th. I mean, there's some grass there, but it's not what you would normally see on June 4th. But we were also running short of hay because of holding our cattle back. On June 7th, I remember, talking to producers and you still see a little bit more growth. And we were all nervous, but we all still believed, because we lived in Rainy River District, that the rain would come. So we still had hope. But by the middle of June, though this is not a pasture, this is a picture of my lawn, but by the middle of June, places like this were turning pretty brown and dry. And this is not what you would see on a lawn in Rainy River that you normally have to cut every 3 days. And you can see the sky even looks a little dark in this picture, but on most years when the sky turned like this, you'd probably get an inch or 6. But in 2021, we didn't get a drop. So the first thing that we started to do, and so Gabriel was talking about feeding, like feed stuff through the winter, lower quality feeds, and dealing with those issues. Well, we were dealing with this on a path, like it started for us with pasture as well. So what we had to start doing was fencing. And the pictures here are from another producer, a fairly large producer. They probably run around 300 cows or maybe even a bit more. This is actually a place, fields that we would normally take hay on, but it wasn't worth cutting, but it was worth a lot to these animals that didn't have pasture. And we did more fencing. And in these pictures, I know it may be hard to see the electric fence wire, but we fenced off bush that had never seen a cow before. We fenced off bush trails that had decent standard trefoil, because like I said, the trefoil seemed to survive our frost a bit better. So we fenced off everything that we could. And this was something that you just don't see in Rainy River. We had farmers fencing off right alongside of a road. We don't have ditches like many places. We have deep ditches that are fairly narrow, usually growing a willow tree. But last year when you drove down the road and you see anything green, it looked valuable. So we were given permission by municipalities and even just neighbors to start, putting fences up to keep our cows, well, obviously fed, and, we didn't want to move them out of the district. So besides fencing, obviously, like Gabriel mentioned, water is pretty important. The dugouts were dry, so then become hauling water and fencing were two of the main jobs that we did, which we do obviously all the time, but this became a little more intense. At the same time, then we thought we would try to make hay, obviously, and you may or not be able to see, but there is a windrow here in this picture, and the stories were really unreal when it came to making hay. Places that some people would say, on a good year, I would, I'd have 200 bales on this field, and this year I had 4. It was very difficult to make hay. Like it was like baling. If you just think of chaff on a, that falls out of your baler at the end of a day, or at the bottom of a conveyor, if you were unloading some square bales, that's what we were trying to bale. And it was tough. The round balers, to me, I was like, I have a fairly new baler and it's not working. And, you'd be almost literally crying, because obviously you have animals that are counting on you to make winter's feed, but there just wasn't enough there to make a bale. These were just some of the deep cracks that we saw at the research station, and jokingly we had to be careful not to like twist an ankle, because some of them became really big, and it's something you just don't see in our district. So that's why the impact was so heavy. So then here we are now. we're not able to make hay. The cattle here are running out of pasture, obviously. And we needed to start feeding these cattle because there just wasn't enough for them to eat. So that just, the problem was just compounding. And at this point, this was just in July, and my cousin that a vet here in Rainy River District was normally here. I think her busy preg checking season is obviously through the fall, but she was fully booked in July with people that, had run their bull, let's say 20, 21 or 30 days. And anything that wasn't bred had to leave the district because they couldn't afford to keep these cows or feed the cows that were there. We quickly, I won't go too much into this, but we quickly reached out to the Beef Farmers of Ontario, saying that we in Rainy River and Northwestern Ontario, because the district north of us, Kenora district, was as severe and Thunder Bay was following close behind, that we were in trouble. We were nervous about losing cows. We had already at this point lost cattle were leaving the district, but we needed to feed our animals, and what we were going to do. So literally more or less over a weekend, there was a plan in place, and feed fairly shortly after that started arriving in the Rainy River District. Now, this was temporary feed. This wasn't going to be the fix for the winter, but this was going to buy us some time, probably 2 to 3 weeks worth of feed, depending on how many cattle you had to apply, long story. But we did start to get some hay, and there was some relief and some optimism at this point that it'll rain, it's still going to work out. So we were fortunate to have Premier Doug Ford and the Minister Thompson visit us, and we were pretty proud and pretty pleased with how quickly this came to us. So here we are now starting to think about what are we going to do with this, with feeding our cattle through the winter. In Rainy River District, we do have, I'd say at one point this was cow country, but we have some pretty big grain operations at this point too. At the end of our district, we're not too far from Winnipeg. So at the end of our district, we do actually open up and it becomes somewhat prairie-like. Transportation costs, which we all know were extremely high, and the hay would have to move in to us from the east for the most part, because the west was dealing with the same drought as us. We was suggested that we start moving cattle out rather than bring feed in. That was probably the cheaper option. But within the district, we did have some pretty decent grain crops. The frost, there was less, well, they had replanted some crops, but the frost affected some of those crops a lot less than it did our forages. Timing, and other things that led to that. So cattle had already been being called at a really high rate. And like I said, we looked to the west for hay, but that wasn't going to happen. Probably the best option as looking and sitting down at the table with our grain producer friends was that the corn crop would be the best option for us. But using this new feed stuff for many of the beef farmers also meant new feeding equipment. And we were already financially sort of stressed and strapped with extra fencing, extra water, the things that we needed. So we really had to sit at the table and think about what we were going to do. Grain producers started offering straw as a feed source because most times they were chopping this back on the field. BFO, Beef Farmers of Ontario, started to develop a pretty significant list of hay that was available for us to purchase. Some cattle did end up leaving the district to be fed. And then the government, the Ministry of Ag and Food, did offer us financial help for feed and water. So these were the options that we were dealing with at this point. This is just a picture of some of the larger herds that chose to move some cows out to be fed. It was a tough decision. It seemed like people that were calling, offering this to us seemed like they felt like it was sort of a no-brainer for us to move these cattle, but people were not real keen on sending these genetics and these cattle that they've worked hard to build up to move out of the district. And then there was a concern about moving them back in, before calving, timing, and not having a disaster on your hands. So I'm just going to show you some of the stuff that we ended up feeding. And I'm not going to go into every number on these feed tests, but you can see like this was just some wheat straw that we were feeding. And not great protein, not great TDN, any of those things. But like Gabriel mentioned, the producers that ended up feeding this stuff knew they were going to have to manage it and add something else to it. So wheat straw that was baled within the district was fed. I think this is oat straw. Same thing. It was something that we could get cheaper because it was within the district. And then because that was, obviously poor quality, pellets were used. The thing with pellets was, how do we feed 300 cows pellets? And are we going to go and spend a bunch of money on troughs or feed bunks? We could feed on the snow if it was -40. But it's not always -40. Like today it was melting and you would have had a pretty big mess. So there was all kinds of things that we had to deal with to get this pellet into the cows. There were some TMRs bought, but not that wasn't for everyone. This is some corn stover. I think if you know anything about our district, we were known for feed, and we'd often have feed for sale. And I don't think most producers here ever thought they'd be going out behind a combine baling up some corn stover, and their cattle up really quite enjoying this corn. So that it worked. Like we made it work. This is just some of the hay that was brought in. Some of this stuff was brought in from the neighboring district in Thunder Bay. They weren't at one point. Thunder Bay had some rain that we didn't have, so there was some available feed. Again, not the greatest protein, but when you have no hay, low protein seems pretty good. This is some first cut hay that was just baled within the district. Decent hay, but there was just not much there. And I think I forgot to mention that once this all happened and the heat came, we also had grasshoppers that chewed off things. We could literally stand in the field and hear them chewing. It was that bad. So we were battling them as well. This here, I believe, is some of the hay that I purchased and another producer purchased. It was actually, they went into Thunder Bay. The producer from Rainy River drove into Thunder Bay and actually baled this field. And it was a field that hadn't been cut for years. But it was forage to us. So it was some of the hay that we brought into the district. Again, not the greatest protein. My cows didn't not love it, so I had to alternate between this and some of the little better quality, but they survived and did pretty well. Oh, this is another one of the old fields that was brought in. So again, not everything was great quality. I don't have a feed test available here tonight to show you of the corn silage that I'm going to talk about next, I think. But this was the next thing, that there is a fair bit of corn growing in the district. There's just been a few beef producers starting to grow corn on their farm. But last year, this was the crop that we seemed to be able to, make a partnership within our district and started feeding this corn. But this was also very expensive. Like all the tractors obviously were owned by the producer, but the corn ended up getting chopped and hauled in, all that had to be paid for and hauled to the farm. This particular farm spent a lot of money, but he also didn't want to get rid of cows. And then how to feed it. So this is just a few pictures of him feeding it, and I think that it worked out really well. And maybe we had the right winter to feed the way we did out on the snow. There was a fair bit of snow, and it stayed fairly cool. Yeah, so I think that's it. We were scrambling because the feed that we did end up buying to keep our cows through the winter, even the hay that was brought in, was really expensive. We were talking $200 and $250 for a bale of hay. But the other guys were feeling that if we didn't do that and they sold their cows, what are they going to do next year? Get an off-farm job. So we did what we had to do to keep our cow herd. So what did we learn? I think we learned a lot of things, but I think some of it we've already forgot this year because we have hay. But cows were a lot more durable than what Rainy River District thought or even knew. Our cows tend to always be looking at a full feeder. And we learned that last year you could actually roll a bale out or maybe a bale and a half out and your cows would do fine. Everybody got a chance to eat, and that you could leave the feeder empty for a day or make them clean it all up and they survived. I want to just point out that some cows did have a tougher winter, but again, talking to my vet cousin, when she was going into the fall, she had got rid of, they'd done a lot of preg checking early, and the animals that maybe were preg checked later were all pregnant. So cows were still in good shape, though they had a pretty tough summer and a tough fall, and going into a winter, maybe not the best shape. There were some cows with lower body scores this spring, and the vet did notice that there was some calving issues, not so much C-sections, just some odd calvings. Now, is that related to the feed stuff? It could be, or it could have been other things, just one of those years. Hay was expensive, but so was replacing genetics. And I know at one of our early meetings when meeting was like, get rid of bulls, get rid of things that you just can't, you can't afford to feed. But guys really had a hard time thinking about replacing, $10,000 and more bulls too. So we brought hay in. you'll never get help without asking for it. And I think that's the thing that like look within your area, and make sure people know what's going on. You know, if we didn't reach out and say we're in crisis mode, we may have not got that help. We may not have got that temporary feed, and we may have a lot less cows and farms here in this district. And I think, like, don't discount anything. Like I don't think there's a lot of guys that ever thought they'd be feeding corn stover or wheat straw in a bale ring, because, you know, we maybe didn't always have lots of straw in the Rainy River district, but we weren't expecting our cows to eat it, but they did. and they did all right on it. But we also did see a little bit of animosity that, you know, when the beef producer was looking to the grain farmer, seeing that they had some decent crops and maybe they should be sharing, you still have to realize that, you know, they're looking after their operations, and they could be tied to some contracts and tied to things that they can't just walk away from what they're doing. So sit down at the table and see what, you know, what works for both of you. So this is what it looked like. You know, this is a dugout in 2021, the top picture here, and then this is what it looks like now, pretty much back to normal. And this is the same feed or same fields, 2021, 2022. I won't play the video. By September 6th, though, and this is from the 6th throughout the month, we did start to get some rain, obviously, and the grass started to grow back. Now, by no means this is like great grass, but after you've seen what we went through, this looked pretty impressive. And the cattle were certainly happy to not eat hay. The cattle in Rainy River don't, or probably nowhere, want to eat a bale of hay in the middle of July. So lots of questions to us were, did you guys have a drought plan? And do you have a drought plan now? So we did not have a drought plan, or at least the producers that I worked with did not have a drought plan. We definitely tend to have maybe not enough feed for another year ahead of us, but we tend to have more feed available than what we need. Do we have a drought plan now? I'd say some of us are a bit more prepared, and I think that we are now more aware about these adverse weather events that can happen. And we joke all the time about being in Rainy River and we don't need a drought plan. But I think that we do realize that now, though I still see some people feeding this year a little more loosely than they did last year already. Like it's only a year, but we did have a pretty good feed year. So this was the joke last year, like everybody just wanted hay for Christmas, but it was actually the truth, because it was expensive hay, and we certainly spent a lot more money on feeding our beef cows last year in Rainy River than we have in many years. So that's it. Hopefully I shared enough information with you. I could probably sit and talk to you about it a lot better than I can presenting here tonight, but yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Kim Jo. So with that, we are going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions and you haven't had a chance to throw it into the Q&A function, I highly suggest you guys do that. But we do have a couple questions that have rolled in. And so we're just going to dive in there, and feel free, like I said before, if questions are coming up throughout the course of this Q&A period, enter them as we go, and we'll answer questions until they're all done. So the first question that I have for you both is, has there been any research on using apple cider vinegar? And they have a dosage of 4 ounces per head per day to help beef cattle digest or utilize poor quality forages. This question asker has heard of individual claims of 20% or better efficiency. So can either of you speak to that?
I can't, but Gabriel may be able to.
Just trying to check here if I understand the question. Apple cider? Okay, sorry, I don't think I've heard about apple cider as a way to improve forage digestion. Sorry.
All good. So another question that we have is, when improving forage digestion for ruminants, one of the easy ways we hear about is adding additives like a probiotic, such as live yeast. Is there other products on the market? They gave an example of Diamond V, which claimed to be a probiotic product. Is there any evidence of what would perform better, a prebiotic or a probiotic, or any other sort of additive that you would recommend that would give you the most bang for your buck in terms of supplementing with low quality forage?
There's tons of products out there, right? Many companies marketing them from like they're saying there, like DFM products and yeast products and enzymes out there. The thing is, it's hard to know. There's no consistency in the literature. So really, and even if you look at their work that has some results with some of those products, the impact is minimal. So when we're really talking about like low quality forage digestion, what you can get from those things, they can help sometimes, but it's minimal compared to everything else we talked in this presentation here today. So I think we got to look at everything else first, and then after you're doing everything else, then you think about those other things.
Thanks, Gabe. So Kim Jo, you made a comment about when drought was hitting and you were looking for certain feed sources and stuff, that you reached out to Beef Farmers of Ontario. Is there anyone else or any sort of people in your team that you reach out to when things get tough, that when you're looking for advice or consultation, that you could recommend other producers reaching out to in tough times?
Well, certainly. I mean, I guess definitely your organization, that like obviously there's a beef association in all provinces, but your ministry too. Like I think keep a close relationship with any of your ministry staff and your MPs and MPPs. If we all complain and think that they're not doing much for us, but if they don't know what we're going through, it is difficult for them to help. And even just like this, like I know we continually talk about mental health issues, but like this was mentally very hard on many producers, because most people take great deal of pride in caring and looking after their cattle. So just like reaching out to one another and looking out for one another, because this was a really tough issue for people to go through. And I think when the Minister Thompson actually visited the Rainy River District and actually, talked to these producers face to face and seen the impact that it had on them, and the impact on, though the feed was, for a short period of time, what it did to those producers, how it, perked them up, that there was optimistic thoughts that we might get through this now. So just share your story, but share your story with the people that may be able to provide some help. So we were really fortunate, and they saved our butts for sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Kim. We have another question here. Do you use protein tubs to help get through drought and winter of tough feed? And what's your thoughts about using them? If Kim Jo and Gabe, if you could both provide an answer, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, there's producers that use protein tubs and licks even prior to the drought. They seem to think, some producers think it's great stuff. But I think just having that feed test and knowing what you're feeding and making good use of mineral, and maybe that the protein tub would be an addition that you would add. So yes, they're used. I just think you need to do more than just purchase that feed tub. I think you need to know what you're feeding as a whole.
Yeah, and I think we need to know what's in that protein tub, right? Like if it's like a bunch of just like a urea and molasses with those low quality forage, like I said, it's very limited value. It doesn't do much. You really need some real true protein, so not just the urea. And those leak tubs, like sometimes just a few animals go and are eating that all day, and most of the animals are not having access to it. So there's many concerns there. You definitely don't get the gains of a proper supplementation with a pelleted feed or with like a protein supplement or like the DGS or something else that you could be doing. So those are usually quite expensive. So I think it's something to think really about if that's the best option. And like I said, there's many of different tubs out there, and you really need to know which tub and what they are providing, and if animals are really eating what you expect from them. So kind of difficult to answer there.
Thank you both. This is a question for Kim Jo. Did this experience with drought change the way you look at feeding your cattle moving forward?
For sure. Not just myself, but others in the district. We definitely have. Like I think that if you're from an area that's fortunate enough to have rainfall like what we normally do, and I mean it can go both ways, but we just tend to overfeed our cattle and we wasted a lot of feed. And I mean, just talking amongst our own producers, we didn't even realize it ourselves what we were doing. And guys with larger herds had been already somewhat limiting their cows. They were maybe more advanced than some of us guys that had 50 cows. So it has changed the way. But I just made a comment to a producer the other day that was saying, we had a little cold snap and he was saying, oh, I'm feeding 12 bales a day right now, but just the cows are really, really taking the hay on. But last year, and he has a large herd. Last year, he bought like a TMR mixer and was, using straw in his mix. And I was thinking he's taking this beautiful like alfalfa silage out. I don't know why he's not, supplementing with some straw this year, but I think he forgot already that his cows did all right on that. But yeah, we have looked at it differently for sure. And we do feel that this is the more normal, this is extreme weather. So I think that we don't want to see a drought or anyone else to experience it, but I think we do feel a little more prepared for it, I guess, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Kim Jo. A question for both Gabriel and Kim Jo. In terms of drought preparedness and stuff like that, if you were giving advice to someone who doesn't have a drought plan, but were interested in it, what would be some of the key areas that you would point to in terms of focusing on when developing that plan, or even just starting to think about it in terms of low quality forage or just drought in a larger context? Thank you.
Sure. So I guess is really thinking about planning enough forage supply, I think, right, is the first thing. And so if you can store forage and prepare forage for a longer period of time, like Kim was saying, like maybe have feed for an extra year, that would be great. But we all know that sometimes there's a challenge in doing that. There's a lot of cost that's sitting there on the farm. So it's really, we need to analyze it case by case and talk with the producer what's possible and start to make those plans. Other things you can start to do and think ahead is making contracts of like feed and planning those contracts ahead of time. So you're not like waiting for the time you need to feed to start looking for that feed. So I think there's many things around that you can do to start planning. But the first thing is sitting down and having a long-term view in terms of how many animals I will need to feed, how much feed I have right now, how much feed I will need for the next year or two, and how can I make more feed? How can I store more feed? Or if not, am I going to be buying from somewhere? Or can I contract feed or make those plans? I think that's the first step to moving forward. But let's see what Kim is doing and her experience.
Well, similar thoughts, but I think the biggest thing is knowing what's available, like or establishing those relationship with what's going on within your sort of immediate area, because we all know that the transportation was a huge issue for us. But I think now that we've we've got better relationships or a better understanding of what's actually available within our district. Like I know Gabe had mentioned, like, you know, perhaps a seed cleaning plant and things that in an area where you've always had a lot of like feed available, and then when you don't, then you're like scrambling. You didn't develop that relationship or even realize that that was there because it was a waste and they were maybe selling it for people to feed their deer. Like it just, you just have to, I think that we now realize that, and even our grain guys, like we, you know, we had to develop that relationship so that they would consider not chopping that straw back onto the field, because to be able to keep our beef cows, you know, that straw was really valuable. So I think in like somewhat of an inventory, and yeah, and know what's available and not, and I guess like the worst part of that drought that we experienced, it was so widespread, but you know, I mean, just your neighboring districts, you know what's there, I guess is like step one, at least for me.
Yeah, and another thing is I think we need to sit down and really write down the cost of everything and calculate everything, because people don't like to talk about cooling animals, but we know that a lot of the producers that stay in the business, they had sometimes to cool animals and maybe reduce a little bit to keep their farms viable, and that may be okay for a period of time, then you can grow back again, right? So make sure there's many things you need to consider, and people don't like to hear about those things, but sometimes that's an important thing to consider, and probably sometimes a good way to avoid like getting too much debt and other issues, right? So those are big things, I think, that we need to sit down really and calculate costs and think ahead of time, that can really prevent getting in a very bad situation.
Thank you both. Keeping cognizant of time, we are going to answer this one question and then maybe another one if time permits. But this one's directed to Kim Jo, but I believe both of you might have insight on this question. So have farmers in your particular region ever tried or added sorghum or Sudan grass to your drought plan, whether as haylage or as pasture?
Yeah, actually, and there's been some growing in the past, but there was a lot more growing this summer, and so yeah, we have grown that here, but also our beef producers are growing a lot more. Like we've seen a lot more corn growing for the beef farmers this summer too. So yeah, I think some of our cropping systems and looking at trying to get that most you know, amount of tons of per acre off was what everyone was looking at this year, going from a pretty slight year to this. So yeah, for sure we've looked at that and it has happened. Yep.
Yeah, like those I think tropical forages, I think there's a lot of interest in them because they can be quite productive, but we got to remember that we're still in Canada, and in a lot of places some of those tropical forages, we still have like challenges in getting them going, and that can be quite costly to produce them if they're not going to produce. So really got to look into the areas that we have data that they would fit. So I would be a bit careful with some of those tropical forages. There's quite a bit of work that was done in Manitoba trying some of those forages that didn't really go far. So I would be a bit careful with some of those.
Thank you both. We are going to answer one last question and then we're going to wrap it up for this evening. So the question is, what do you think of chelated minerals when supplementing low quality forage?
So chelated minerals, we know there's quite a bit of work on it, and they can have a little bit higher bioavailability than the more like inorganic sources, right? But they usually are quite expensive, so you got to think about that. And most of the times we can meet the requirements by increasing the quantity of the the inorganic minerals we're feeding, right? So you just need to work with your nutritionist to balance that mineral supplement adequate to meet your requirements, right? Sometimes they can be very useful in situations where you have challenges meeting those requirements because of some they're binding to some other mineral becoming available, like when you have high sulfur levels and the issues with copper. So you can those can be useful in some of those situations, but still I think it's you gotta be cautious. It's not something we recommend I would recommend to everyone as a solution, because many times with cheaper sources we can fix the problem. So really important to work with your nutritionist and to solve that issue.
Yeah, that I would say the same thing. I know that there's definitely some chelated minerals being fed here, but again, you'll have to sit down and look at those feed tests and talk to your nutritionist to, to see what works best for you, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you again to both of our speakers for joining us this evening. You both provided very insightful information, and we really appreciate having you. For those of you who are still with us, we invite you to stay connected. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, as well as please subscribe to our mailing list. We have all kinds of amazing articles and stuff, and you can keep up to date with upcoming webinars and events that we're putting on. Our next webinar will not be until the new year in January, and it'll kick off the first part of our 3-part series in record keeping for production management. So once again, thank you so much, Gabriel and Kim Jo. It was such a great webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and I really hope to see you guys soon. Have a great evening.